What's up YouTube, TCG Radish here, and today I'll be going over version 1.2 of the Mystic Stadium trading card game official rulebook. So since the last time I've made a rules video, there's been one minor tweak. I will make sure to point that out. And this will go a little more in depth into the rules, as that video was kind of just a very basic how to play guide. So yeah, let's get right into it. So here's the table of contents. If at any point you feel the need to pause the video to read something, feel free to do that, and I'll also leave a link to a PDF in the description. Alright, let's go to the first section. So first off, Mystic Stadium TCG is a game for 2 players, and each player should have their own deck of 30 cards, and each of those decks can contain up to 3 copies of any unique card. Alright, let's move on. And each player has a board which has 5 zones in it, being the Stadium, Deck Zone, Discard Zone, Energy Zone, and Soul Zone. And each player also has a hand of cards they hold. And one important thing to note is some zones are face up and some are face down. And what that means is in a face up zone, if a card is placed there, it should be visible to all players. And in a face down zone, neither player should be able to see what that card is. And also, if you move a card from a face down zone to another face down zone, you can't look at that card. So for example, if you're paying energy and you're moving face down cards from your energy zone to the bottom of your deck, since both of those zones are face down zones, you can't look at the cards that you're moving. And we've got a little description here for each zone. So for your hand, these cards are visible to only you and not your opponent, and you can hold on to them. Your deck zone is where your deck is placed at the beginning of the game, and that is a face down zone. Discard zone is a face up zone, and order doesn't matter in your discard zone, so that's an important thing to note. And this is where you're going to place monsters that are destroyed, your monsters specifically, and spell and flash cards that you play and resolve. And then we've got the Stadium, which is where monster cards go when you play them, and they're considered monsters while they're in that zone. And then we've got the Soul Zone. So the cards in your Soul Zone are kind of like your life. So the goal of the game is to empty all the cards out of your opponent's Soul Zone. And if you do this, you win the game. And the Soul Zone is a face down zone, so you have to place the cards there face down and also in a stack. And to break a soul, which is something that happens when a monster attacks you, and for some effects mention this as well. And all you need to do is take the top card of your Soul Zone and put it on top of your Energy Zone. And then you've got the Energy Zone, also a face down zone, also where order matters. And when you pay X energy, which is something that you do to play cards, you take the top X cards in your Energy Zone and put them on the bottom of your deck. I'll go more into detail on all this stuff later on. Alright, now we've got card types. So the first card type we have is monster cards. All monster cards have a tan color template. They're played on the Stadium and you use them to battle. Usually how you're going to play a monster card is paying its cost in energy, and the cost is that number in the blue circle on the upper left hand corner. So you pay the energy cost and then you play them, and that's called a summon during your main phase. I'll get more into that. When a monster is played, sometimes it has an effect that says when played, and that effect does not resolve until your opponent has a chance to play a flash card. But the monster will enter the Stadium instantly. So by the time your opponent has a chance to respond, the monster will already be in the Stadium. Its effects just won't resolve until your opponent either decides to not respond or responds. A monster card is only considered a monster when it's in the Stadium, otherwise it's just called a monster card. Some effects will allow changes to the stats of a monster card or to its abilities, and any change that happens will go away if the monster leaves the Stadium and then re-enters it. And lastly, some effects involve stunning monsters, and when a monster is stunned, you can turn it sideways to indicate that it's stunned, and stunned monsters can't attack, and their shield isn't contributed to your total shield. and I'll get more into what that means later. But all monsters are unstunned at the end of each player's turn. Alright, moving on to spell cards. So spell cards have a blue color template, and they are played for a one-time effect, and then you discard them. So you send them to your discard zone. Generally, the way you play a spell card is through a cast, and what that means is it happens during your main phase. You pay the energy cost, similarly to how you would pay the energy cost for a summon. Then you play the spell card, follow its effect, and then discard it. Just as with any other card play, your opponent has a chance to play a flash card in response before your effect resolves. And speaking of flash cards, here we are. So flash cards have a purple colored template. They're played for a one-time effect and discarded just like spell cards, but you have to play them as a response to an opponent's play. This play can be any card. You can only play one flash card as a response, so you can't stack a bunch of them in response to one card. Each time you play a card, just like with any type of card, if you play a flash card, your opponent also has a chance to respond before its effect resolves. So eventually the order of resolution will begin when a player opts not to respond to a card. Then the most recent card will resolve first, and then it will go in order that way. Starting the game. Alright, so first you want to determine which player will take the first turn. You could do this with a coin flip. Now the first thing each player will do, and this is a tweak from before, is take 5 cards from their deck and shuffle them and place them down into their soul zone. So the order of soul zone cards now is randomized. You still get to choose the cards. Although there was definitely a strategy aspect to choosing the order of your soul zone, I did feel like it's a lot simpler to just shuffle them so that you don't have to spend so much time thinking about that. And I like the simplicity that comes with that. So yeah, that is the rule now. You do have to shuffle your soul zone cards, but you do still get to pick those 5 cards. And then you're going to want to shuffle the remaining 25 cards of your deck, place it in your deck zone, then draw 5 cards. And both players will do this. And then after this is when the first turn of the game begins. Alright, turn structure. So during a player's turn, they're considered the active player and their opponent is the passive player. And sometimes cards will mention this. Each turn is divided into 5 phases, and I'll just kind of go through these phases. So first we've got the start phase. Generally, nothing happens during this phase, but sometimes some cards have effect that say turn start or at the beginning of your turn or something like that. This is when those effects would occur. Next we've got a draw phase, and this is where if your hand has 4 or fewer cards, you're going to draw until you have 5 cards or until the deck zone is empty. So let's say you have 1 card in your hand and 1 card left in your deck zone. All you have to do is just draw that last card, and then your draw phase would end. But if your deck zone has no cards in it, instead of drawing cards, you break 1 soul. Then we've got our charge phase, and that is when you take up to 3 cards from your hand and place them into your energy zone face down in any order. If you want, you could put fewer than 3 cards or not place any cards at all. Then we've got our main phase. Now this is where most of the stuff happens during your turn. There are 3 different actions that you can perform during this phase, and you can perform them in any order and as many times as you want, as long as you're able to. Those are summon, cast, and attack. Now to summon, you take a monster card from your hand, you pay energy equal to its cost, and then you play it. And when you play it, you just put it right into the stadium. And a cast is similar, but it's with a spell card. You pay energy equal to its cost and play it as well. And then attacking. So each of your monsters can attack up to once per turn, and they can choose either to attack an opponent's monster or your opponent directly. In order to be able to attack, there are some restrictions. So to attack a monster, the power of your monster that is attacking has to be greater than or equal to the opponent's monster's shield. And if you want to attack your opponent, your monster that's attacking has to have power that's greater than their total shield. And a total shield of your opponent is the sum of all shield values of unstunned monsters. So what happens when you attack a opponent's monster is it's destroyed and it is put into the discard zone. If you attack your opponent directly, then they break 1 soul. And there is a limit on the number of times you can attack your opponent directly, and that's up to 2 times. But you can attack your opponent's monsters as many times as you want. Also, stunned monsters can't attack, and the player going first can't attack on their first turn. And then we've got the end phase. This is where effects wear off and both players unstun all their monsters. And then it's the next player's turn. And the 2 players keep exchanging turns until someone's soul zone has no cards in it, and then that player loses the game. Alright, sudden effects. Sudden effects are effects that occur immediately upon certain conditions being met. However, they do not occur during the unfinished resolution of an effect. And I'll give an example for that. So one of the sudden effects is when a player's soul zone has no cards in it, their opponent wins the game, so they lose the game. But say there was an effect that allowed you to take a card out of your soul zone and then put another card into it, then you would not lose the game upon taking that card out of your soul zone, because even though your soul zone has no cards in it, you're in the middle of an effect resolution. And another important thing to note is sudden effects should always take priority over other triggered effects. So for example, if you have a monster and its shield is reduced to 0, you can't save it with another triggered effect because its shield being reduced to 0 would destroy it before any other effects could trigger. So currently there are 3 sudden effects in the game. The first one is if an effect that has allowed searching a deck has occurred, that deck must be shuffled immediately after that effect's resolution. Secondly, if a monster's shield is reduced to 0 or less, it is destroyed. And then lastly, the win condition of the game, which is if a player's soul zone has no cards in it, their opponent wins the game. Lastly, I've listed some additional rules and clarifications just to iron out any possible confusions with the game. Most of these should be pretty self-explanatory, but I'll make sure to point out the ones that I think are notable. And the first notable one is the 4th one, which is all choices for spell or flash cards are made upon the resolution of the effect. So if a spell or a flash card requires you to choose a target, you don't have to choose that target as you play it, and instead you choose it as it resolves. So that is notably different from games such as Magic the Gathering. Another notable rule is if multiple effects would trigger at the same time, and these effects could be different players' effects. First, the active player resolves all of their effects in any order they choose, then the passive player does that with all their effects. I kind of alluded to this in the turn start and turn end phase descriptions, but yes, that is how all effects triggering should be handled. I'll also explain unaffected a bit more, since there are already some cards with that ability. So a monster that's unaffected by an effect cannot have its stats or abilities changed by the effect, and it cannot be moved from the stadium into the hand or any other zone, and it cannot be stunned or destroyed. If a card effect would affect more than one monster, and one or more of those monsters are unaffected by it, that effect isn't nullified. So those other monsters are still affected. You just ignore that effect for the unaffected monsters. Lastly, I've also written in the constructability ruling, but those cards won't show up for a while, so don't worry about that. And I think that's it, so let me know in the comments if there's any clarifications I can make. Big thanks to everyone subscribed to the channel, it really helps me out. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you next time.